Yesterday we talked about the three characteristics of phenomena, namely sabhava lakkhana, individual characteristics, sankata lakkhana, properties of sankara, namely genesis, aging and dissolution, and lastly samyanya lakkhana, meaning universal or common characteristics. And out of these things, what is to be known in the practice of satipatthana? As we are taking food, we chew food properly, and if we are chewing it, taking the food carefully or with mindfulness, we are bound to know things. That is, if we will know when we are doing it seriously, because in the food are these flavors. Every food has its flavor or taste. And there are 6 kinds of flavors. You are knowing it. As you chew the food as sweet, or you're feeling it as sweet, sour, bitter, salty, and so on. There are 6 kinds of flavors. You are bound to know one of these 6 flavors or tastes, known in Pali as sarasa, which we discussed both from the theoretical and practical aspects. That is the individual flavor. So too in the body there are these characteristics, especially the individual characteristic known as sarasa or sabhava, and it is important to know this. And what to do with this? In the practice of Vipassana, there is this fixed law, niyama, that is note at the very moment. At the very moment means at the very moment of arising. Arising of these 6 sense objects, arising through the 6 sense doors. When you are seeing, you note at the very moment of seeing. When you hear, you note at the very moment of hearing. When you smell, you note at the very moment of smelling. When you taste, you note at the very moment of tasting. And when you touch, you note at the very moment of touching. And when you know or think, you note at the very moment of knowing or thinking. So in this way there are 6 kinds of objects arising through the 6 sense doors. And you are bound to observe one of these 6 objects. And you observe them or note it as it becomes obvious. They are conditioned things, and you have to be with the moment. That means note at the very moment of arising, or note at the moment of presently arising object. This is what is meant by at the very moment, just like the saying, strike while the iron is hot. So you do it when at the moment of arising. Note at the very moment. We gave the example yesterday of the flashing of lightning, and if you want to study or know the nature of lightning, you watch it at the very moment of lightning. So too with these objects, you note at the very moment of their arising. And also there is another niyama, fixed law. Only when you note at the very moment, you will observe sabhava. Sabhava means the individual characteristic. And such kind of knowing is not through imaginations, fantasies, or from the books, or from what the teachers say. It is a definite experience of yourself. It is a personal experience by way of noting. When you note, you are bound to observe the individual characteristics, especially when you note with the mobilization of full mental powers. So only when you note at the very moment, you are bound to see the individual characteristic, sabhava. Hence this definite fixed law that when you know at the very moment, you will observe sabhava. When we say note, when you note at the very moment, you observe sabhava. That means at the very moment of the objects arising through the six sense doors. There may be just one thing which is obvious. Whatever arises will be noted. Suppose one watches the abdomen and note rising and falling as you breathe in and out. When you breathe in, there will be rising of the abdomen, which is obvious. And when you breathe out, the abdomen will fall, which is also obvious. These are known even by the children. By children. Those rising and falling are very obvious. They are evident. They are existent, not non-existent. They are not imagined things, nor imaginations. Every time you breathe in and out, there's bound to be rising and falling of the abdomen. In fact, although we say rising and falling of the abdomen, the essence which we are to observe are the stiffness, tension, movement, natural phenomena, which are the manifestation of the element of the wind, which are very obvious, known as sabhava. There's no denial about it. When rising takes place, there's bound to be these sensations, such as stiffness, tension, and when falling takes place, there are bound to be these sensations, relaxation, movement, etc. All these things are the manifestation of the element of wind. Like the presence of taste in the food, so too these sabhava, namely stiffness, tension and movement, exist in rising and falling if you look carefully. We are bound to see the sabhava. That is what is meant by noting at the very moment. By noting at the very moment, we are bound to see these natural characteristics. If you connect your noting mind with the object carefully. Now, out of these objects rising at the six sense doors, the hearing is most obvious. When Sayadaw is talking, you could hear with your ears sound waves striking the eardrum. The sound waves are the striker elements striking the eardrum, resulting in hearing consciousness, because your ear is sensitive and you can accept the sound. And the ear, or sensitivity of the ear, is known as base element, where the sound waves strike, and the sound waves are striker element, causing hearing consciousness, which are known as nama or mentality. And when the sound and hearing consciousness come together in your ear, there is this contact. And this is also very obvious, the contact of consciousness and the sound in your ear, giving rise to feeling, good or bad or neutral. So, good or bad are more obvious, and good also is very obvious, bad feeling also is very obvious, more obvious than the neutral feeling. And such things, that is hearing consciousness, hearing contact, and feeling, are known as mentality, nama. So all these things each of them bear its own characteristics, as we discussed yesterday, known as dhatu, element. For instance, the ear element, the sensitive part of the ear is known as the bass element, and the sound wave which strikes the eardrum is known as striker element, and the resulting hearing consciousness, contact and feeling are known as ignition element. So they are all elements, dhatu, which bear their own characteristics. Each of them bears its own characteristics, hence the name dhatu. So when we combine all together, it will be grouped as a group of sabhava. It can be also just one of these sabhava. One of them can be noted as one sabhava, which is obvious. So, in order to know sabhava, that is base element sabhava, striker element sabhava, and ignition element sabhava can be observed, either all of them or each of them, or one of them, when you note at the very moment of hearing. So also at the very moment of seeing, if you note, you are bound to see these elements or sabhavas. And so too at the very moment of smelling, tasting, touching, thinking or knowing, every lifting, moving, placing of your foot, or even to the extent of every closing and opening of your eyes. All these things are obvious, all the sabhavas can be obvious if you note at the very moment of these activities. Such objects, such things are your objects of attention, and they are to be observed, and they are to be understood as your objects of attention. At the very moment of rising and falling, you are bound to observe, obviously, physical rupa sabhava, physical sabhava, and nama sabhava, mental sabhava. These two things are bound to be observed because they are obvious. Now, what we call rising, in fact, is made up of stiffness, tension, and movement. Or stiffness, tension, and movement, which we call rising. And relaxation, movement, softness, which we call falling, are the real sabhavas. They are obvious characteristics. They are rupa sabhava. So, you are knowing it as you note it, or you're observing them as you note. When you note, when your mind is adverted, or when you pay attention to stiffness at the very moment, you are knowing it is stiffness. When your mind is, when you're paying attention to tension, you are knowing it as tension. And when you're paying attention to moving, then you are knowing it as moving, and so on. So as much as you're paying attention to these sensations, you're going to observe, you're observing them as these stiffness as stiffness, tension as tension, movement as movement. So in this way, you are observing these sabhavas. At times, you may be observing other phenomena, namely pulling, pushing, and you know them as pulling, pushing. And they are also sabhavas. They are known as rupa sabhava, physical characteristics or physical natural phenomena, physical phenomena. You are bound to observe them. You are knowing them. And the noting mind, knowing and noting are nama sabhava, they are mentality. They are mental phenomena. So, these physical phenomena, mental phenomena are happening in pairs, and you are observing them at the very moment of noting rising and falling, at the very moment, with the employment of full mental powers. And your objects of attention are these rising and falling. As for the parts of that rising and falling, for instance, the beginning, the middle and the end, are not the objects to be noted. And so too with these arising and passing away psychophysical phenomena, which are the universal or common characteristics, are also not the objects to be noted. So that's why out of these three characteristics that we were discussing, the first one is to be noted, and the second and third, the remaining two characteristics are not to be noted. They are not the objects of attention, because they are not real paramatthas, ultimate. They are not the real ultimates, and they are not the rupa sabhava nor nama sabhava. They are paññattis. We call them as paññatti instead of paramattha. That means they are concepts, not the ultimates. So they have no substance in it. For instance, rising and passing away is not substantial. They are known as time paññatti, time concept, and manner concept, known in Pali as akara paññatti, time paññatti and akara paññatti. And paññattis, that is concepts, are not the objects to be noted. So this is to be understood first and foremost. Suppose you are doing walking meditation and you observe the lifting, moving and placing of your foot, lifting as lifting, moving as moving, and placing as placing. Why do you have to note at the very moment of lifting, moving and placing? Because there are these obvious mind-body objects of mentality and materiality, which are obvious and can be observed if you note carefully. Because of the intention or desire to lift, you lift. As a result of the series of intentions or desires to lift, there arise a series of lifting process. And as you lift, you feel lightness, movement and so on. And this in desire or intention to lift is mentality, nama, and the resultant lifting, which you observe as, which is manifested as lightness, movement, are materialities, rupa. They are material characteristics or material or physical phenomena. And they are quite obvious. And to know these sabhavas, you note at the very moment of lifting, by labeling as lifting, lifting. Now, when you move your foot, at the very moment you are bound to observe these sabhavas, natural phenomena, at the very moment of moving. That is, because of your intention or desire to move, which is mentality, nama, there arises the actual movement of the foot, which is the materiality. As a result of the series of intentions to move, there arises a series of movement of the foot, which are physical phenomena. If you note carefully, you are bound to observe them. You may also observe other phenomena, namely pulling, pushing, which are also the sabhavas, very obvious characteristics. And because of this moving intention or desire to move, there arise this pulling, pushing of the foot, which are very obvious. Therefore, at the very moment of lifting and moving, you observe these mind-body objects, mind-body phenomena, physical or mental phenomena. They are the realities, they are the ultimates. And they are experienced, or they are experienceable by your own personal, through your own practice, when you know at the very moment. You are bound to observe these nama dhamma, rupa dhamma, physical phenomena, mental phenomena. And again, you move, you place your foot, and as a result of the series of intention to place your foot, there arise a series of placing of your foot. Coming down heavily, you feel heaviness and pressure as you press your foot down on the ground. So these are obvious physical and mental phenomena at the moment of moving. In this way, at the moment of placing. In this way, you are bound to observe these physical phenomena, mental phenomena, at the very moment of lifting, moving and placing, if you are noting at the very moment of their arising, and these phenomena will flow like a current of water. That is, the current of physical and mental phenomena will flow continuously. And you note at the very moment of their arising, you observe these physical and mental phenomena, or sabhava. In this way also, when you are doing other movements like bending and stretching of your limbs, of your hands, or when you are sitting or standing, these mind-body phenomena are arising in pairs or together. Let us say you want to sit down from standing position. As a result of the series of intention to sit down, there arises a series of sitting process, the body falling down heavily, which are very obvious. And the intention to sit is the mental phenomena, and the resultant sitting process, which is made up of heaviness, movement, are physical phenomena. They are quite obvious. In this way, you are bound to see the flow of physical, mental phenomena at the very moment of sitting. And they are the experienceable realities. That means they are the realities which can be observed by your own personal experience. And if you want to know these phenomena, physical and mental phenomena, all you have to do is note at the very moment. So too with other activities, when you are stretching your limbs, when you are bending, or even to the extent of closing and opening of your eyes, you are bound to observe these phenomena if you note with full mental powers. At this moment, some yogis are behaving in a different way. We don't know which teachers have taught them. That is, instead of noting the objects which are noted, they are looking for the beginning, the middle and the end of rising and falling, which are not the objects to be noted. It is mere waste of time, and they are not the correct method of practice. It is simply taught that when you note at the very moment, in the spirit of Satipatthana, just connect your noting mind with the object of attention, so that your noting mind enters into the object, it plunges into it with full force, and the noting mind spread over the objects of attention. So it's not to look for the middle, the beginning, middle and the end of these objects. It will be just very tiring if you go on looking for them. And all you have to do is just note the objects as they arise. So instead of looking for the sabhava with the practice of Satipatthana, they are looking for something which is non-existent. And this is just a waste. And others would say in their reporting at interviews, when they are looking for, they're noting rising and falling, they don't find the middle, the beginning or the middle, but they find the end of it. And to observe the end or the dissolution of the objects, one has got to reach the higher insight knowledge. Before you can realize the knowledge of discernment of mind and body, and instead of you are observing the dissolution or the end of the object, is just fantasy or imagination, and this also is a waste of time. Instead of practicing in the spirit of Satipatthana, one is just noting, fantasizing, imagining, and such fantasies or imaginations are not the real knowledge. So by noting correctly in the spirit of Satipatthana, if the sabhava, the phenomena are obvious, then you're bound to observe them evidently, and such is the correct practice. Hence, such also is niyama, fixed law, and at this point, we are not to waste time on such things, on imaginations or fantasies. So, it is very important to note at the very moment, as instructed by the teachers, then only you will observe the sabhava, physical or mental phenomena. And only when you observe the physical mental phenomena, the sabhava, you will come to observe sankata, that is the properties of sankata, namely arising, aging and dissolving, or beginning, middle and the end, which you will observe automatically as a matter of course, not something to look for. So only when you have reached the stage of matured mindfulness, concentration and knowledge, will you be able to observe these properties of sankata, namely arising, aging and dissolving. At this point, the teachers only instruct to note at the very moment of arising, and also when they instruct the yogis to know the objects, they make a kind of demarcation or the boundary from where to where should you note. For instance, when you are noting rising, from which place to which place, and when you are noting falling, from which place to which place. For instance, when you are to note rising, you must note as soon as rising takes place until it ends, the rising ends. And also, this is the only time demarcation, or demarcation limiting by way of time. And also when you are asked to note falling, you are given the limit, such as soon as falling takes place, you note as soon as falling takes place until the falling ends. This is how the limitation or demarcation has been given by the teachers, because they don't want the yogis to be lax or slack on the practice, and to be consistent, instead to be consistent with the practice, so that they will be able to observe the sabhava which you are looking for, the physical or natural, mental phenomena. Only when you observe physical, mental phenomena, sabhava, you will observe sankata. Sankata means the properties of sankata, that is genesis or arising, or beginning, middle and end, or arising, aging and dissolving. So then, as soon as you observe with your own experience the dissolving phenomena of the objects, then you will understand that they are impermanent. Thus, you come to realize the third characteristic known as Samanya Lakkhana, universal or common characteristics, because all objects are universal. This is the universal characteristics applying to all objects, universally or commonly. Hence, the name Samanya Lakkhana. So, only when you observe Sankata Lakkhana, the properties of Sankata by way of beginning, middle and the end of the object, will you come to observe the universal or common characteristics, Samanya Lakkhana. And these are not to look for purposely, but they will be observed as a matter of course, in the course of your practice. When you observe Samanya Lakkhana, universal or common characteristics, you are said to cultivate insight knowledge. Now, as we have just said, we should ask ourselves whether we are walking the path of Vipassana. And there is only one thing to do, that is note at the very moment, with the application of full mental powers. Only this and nothing else. If instead one is doing it by imagination or fantasies, then you may be thinking your fantasy or imagination as your real prudence or wisdom. And then you will not be worth practicing the Satipatthana practice. So instead of fantasizing or imagination, you must do it consistently, exactly and definitely. Then only you will be able to realize the benefit of the practice. Then you will be worthy of practicing Satipatthana. So Sarah exhorts you to be able to practice, to be worthy of Satipatthana practitioner instead of wasting time on fantasies and imaginations. That's all for today.